All right. Well, as you come back in from break, find your seats, and we're just going to have one worship song. So if you want to stand up and join and sing, please feel free to join us. If you want to stay seated and relax and sing, that's fine too. But we're just going to get ready to resume our second session. So come on back in and join us as we get to hear more from Scott and all the awesome things that he is going to continue to share with us here this morning. So join us as we continue to worship the Lord. Great is your faithfulness, O God. You wrestle with the sinner's heart. You lead us by still waters into mercy, and nothing can keep us apart. So remember your people, remember your children, remember your promise, oh God. Your grace is enough, oh your grace is enough, oh your grace is enough for me. Great is your love and justice, God. You use the weak to lead the strong. You lead us in the song of your salvation, and all your people sing along. So remember your people, remember your children, remember your promise, oh God. Your grace is enough, oh your grace is enough, your grace is enough for me. Your grace is enough for me. Yeah, and your grace is enough. Heaven reaches out to us. Your grace is enough for me. God, I sing your grace is enough, and I'm covered in your love.
I hope he gets some really good pizza from Western New York. What do you think? What's the best pizza place in Western New York? You know what I just heard? Blah, 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 blah. That's what I would say. Delorio's are all good. Okay, can I, one of the ushers, would you grab Scott if he's back there? Something? Never mind, I found him. You were lost, but you're found.
I've been found.
Yeah, way to go. Praise
Yes.
the Lord. You ready to go?
Yeah, I'm ready to go.
All right, thanks.
Good.
God bless you.
For any who are wondering, coffee is proof that God has not utterly forsaken us. How many of you got a reload on the break? Good. That's always accepted. Some of you have asked some questions during the break, and I have very good news for you. I'm going to take the last roughly 20 minutes of the last session that we're together, and it's going to be total Q&A. You can ask anything you want that maybe I didn't cover, that you wished I had. You will be free to disagree with me. You will be wrong, but you're free to disagree with me if you wish. I'm very tolerant and inclusive, but we will open that for you to ask anything you want during that time, and I'll repeat the questions so everybody can hear them and we can get them recorded as needed. So what we're going to do now, we're going to transition from the first question, what is the unborn, to the second question, what makes human beings valuable. But before we do that, I just want to ask, are there any questions strictly on the science side of it? This is not a time to ask a general question. This is a question about just anything you need clarified based on what I've said so far on the science side of it, or on why this comes down to the question, what is the unborn? Is there anybody that I need to clarify anything for? I don't want you to feel like we're just outpacing you at this point. Any questions on that? Okay, again, the notes are going to, oh yes ma'am. Yeah, what about those who argue the embryo cannot sustain itself, therefore it can be killed? I will say more about it, but let me give you a short answer now. When anybody brings up an objection and they make a claim that the embryo can be killed because it cannot sustain itself, who bears the burden of proof? You, the listener, or the person making the claim? The person making the claim. It's actually on them to explain why that matters, not on you. So you could simply say, why do I have to live independent not to be killed? And you could put that on them. And I'll give you some more answer to that as we move through the session. But that would be my first question to them. Why does my living independent of another give me the right to life and not something else? They're just plucking it out of thin air is what they're doing. They're just making stuff up, which we'll say more about in a little bit. Okay, so now we're going to move to, everybody brace yourself, get ready, philosophy. Some of you are going, I don't do philosophy. Yes, you do. Even the statement, I don't do philosophy, philosophy isn't important, is a philosophical statement. So yes, you do philosophy. We all do. Everybody is a philosopher. Nobody gets away without being one. The question is, will you have good philosophy or not? As my friend John Stonestreet says, everybody's got a worldview. You may not think you have a worldview, but you do. If you don't think you have a worldview, you have one. It'll just be a crummy one. So we want to make sure you do good philosophy today. So we're going to look at that second question, what makes humans valuable? And this question, believe it or not, is at the heart of what happened in your state a couple of months ago. Let me just cut right to the chase. Either you believe each and every human being has an equal right to life, or you don't. You got two options there. You either believe each and every human being has a right to life, or you don't. That's the divide in the nation. Now, in just a moment, to help unpack all of this, I'm going to have you look around the room and stare at some people. Don't do it yet, but in just a moment, I'm going to have you stare at some people. If there are any single gentlemen in this room, and you have noticed that there might be some rather attractive single young women here today, and you've been dying to make eye contact, in a moment will be your God-sanctified opportunity to do that. Do not laugh. I met my wife that way. Ladies, same goes for you. We believe in equality. You too may stare. All right? 1, 2, 3, stare at some people. Go. Gentlemen, if you're looking at me, it's the wrong place. Stare around the room. All right? Everybody look back this way. Question. What makes us equal? Are we all physically equal in this room today? Most assuredly not. In fact, a year and a half ago, I did something my wife considered suicidal. I went back to the high school, as I explained to Pastor Pat last night. I went back to the high school where I played on the basketball team as the shooting guard. And I went back at age 57 to play on the alumni team against the current student basketball team. You are laughing. We beat them by 24 points. It's called old man smarts. You plug the middle, force them to take crummy shots, and slow the pace to molasses. Actually, it had helped that we had some young, fresh legs who were recent grads. That helped too, but yeah. Yours truly took only one shot in the game. It was a three-pointer, and I drained it. Nothing but net, baby. And I had a rebound and 3 assists. Some of you go, man, that's nothing. I could do that getting out of bed in the morning. When you're 57, you have one objective for that basketball game. Only one. Avoid hospitalization. If I had to go one-on-one against many of the faces I'm looking at right now, male or female, I would lose. Why? Because at age 59, you no longer have the speed and agility you had when you were 19. You have strength, I will tell you that. Actually, it's true. That's why you see 60-year-olds sometimes competing in weightlifting competitions. You actually can keep your strength up, but speed and agility are gone. And if I had to go one-on-one against many of you, I would lose. Now, here's the thing. If Planned Parenthood is right, that we can kill the unborn because they are not developed enough physically, they are not yet viable, they are not developed enough to live independent. If physical ability is what gives us our value and our right to life, those of you with more of it have a greater right to life than those of us with less of it. Are we all equal in terms of self-awareness right now? No. How many of you had coffee during the break? Yeah? As I said, coffee is proof that God has not forsaken us, yes? Now, if self-awareness is what gives us value, like Peter Singer argues, Peter Singer is the Princeton ethicist who argues that no newborn should be considered a person until 30 days after birth, and disabled infants can be killed on the spot by the attending physician if it meets the preferences of the parents. You know what his argument is? Get ready, you'll agree with a lot of it. Fetus is not self-aware. Newborn is not self-aware. Birth is irrelevant. You can kill both. Now, is he right that fetus is not self-aware and newborns are not self-aware? Yeah, he's right about both of that. Yeah, neither is self-aware. Our conclusion is different, though, than his. But if he's right that self-awareness or self-consciousness or having desires is what gives us a right to life, those of you with more of it have a greater right to life than those with less. Human equality is thrown on the ash heap of history. There's one thing we share equally in this room. Only one. And it does not come in degrees like self-awareness, like viability, like physical ability. The one thing we all share in common is we have the same human nature. You're going, what's a human nature? That sounds out there. A human nature is what determines the kind of thing you are. Your goldfish has a goldfish nature, and the nature of the goldfish sets its basic properties and capabilities and determines the kind of thing it is. Your dog has a dog nature. Cats, I have learned, have a satanic nature. Preach it. Preach. Within 6 months of owning a cat, both of my nice leather jackets had been completely destroyed. They are destructive individuals. Now, what is a human nature? It's the thing that determines the kind of thing you are. Human parents create human offspring. Now, sometimes people will say, okay, I get it. Of course we have human natures as adults, as from newborns forward, but you can't tell me that embryo has a human nature. Not at that stage. Here's your question. How is it possible for two human parents to create offspring that isn't human, but later becomes so? To quote the eminent philosopher Ricky Ricardo, they have some splaining to do. How is that even possible? How is it possible for two human parents to create offspring that isn't human, but later becomes so? They got to argue for that. They got to show why an entity can emerge, how it can emerge from living things different from itself. That's going to be a tall order, a very tall order. Now, this is, for the next 3 minutes, the extra credit part of today's seminar. You have my complete permission to mentally check out for the next 3 minutes. After that, no. But for the next 3 minutes, for those of you that want a little more background on why we're in this mess we're in right now, with people thinking you can have a human being that's not a person, I'm going to tell you how that idea got its genesis and just give you that. So get ready for the next 3, maybe at the most 4 minutes. You can check out. You do not have to try to follow. But the good news is, everything I'm about to tell you, even in the extra credit part, is in the notes, because that's how good I am. I am humble and proud of it, and I hope you will be too. How did we get to this place? There is a worldview idling out there called body-self dualism. Big term, here's what it means. You are not your body. You are your thoughts, your desires, your interaction with others, your memories, but you are not identical with your physical body. The real you is not your body. It's your thoughts, your desires. Everybody clear so far? From that, they argue as follows. When you were conceived, you were biologically human. You had a human body, human form, but you were not yet a person because you didn't have thoughts, desires, the desire to go on living. You didn't have self-awareness. And therefore, what counts for having a right to life is not that you're a human body, but that you're a human who's a person. And you're not a person until you develop the brain structures necessary to support thought. Is everybody following so far with me? That worldview is absurd if you stop to think about it. You end up saying things like, my body showed up before I did. By the way, if you are not your body, you're only your thoughts and desires and memories, none of you have been hugged by your mothers. Because you can't hug desires, memories, and thoughts. You hug bodies. Christianity does not teach the Gnostic worldview that draws this distinction between body and soul and pits the two against each other. The Christian view is that human beings are a dynamic union of body and soul. God made our bodies to glorify Him, and our souls are infused throughout us. We are a dynamic union of body and soul. The soul, the best way to illustrate this, pardon me, The soul does not fill the body like water fills this bottle. Rather, human beings are that dynamic union I spoke of body and soul. On that view, you come to be when your body comes to be, because it's one and the same. Do you see that worldview? Our worldview can actually explain better what gives humans equality and value, because we do not argue that what gives you your value is you were staring around the room a few minutes ago at people and you're thinking, all right, what makes us equal? The Christian worldview, the pro-life worldview, is not that you're valuable because of your functions that may come and go, not because of your characteristics that you may or may not have more of than the guy next to you. The Christian worldview is you have value simply because you have a human nature. And by the way, according to Scripture, whose image does our nature bear the resemblance of? God. We have a human nature that bears the image of our Creator. That worldview can explain human equality. Why? Because what makes us equal is that we all have the same human nature that bears the image of our Maker. We don't draw this line between human being and human person. Have any of you ever met a human that wasn't a person? Those of you with teenagers don't answer, but the rest of you. Have you? I mean, seriously. This is crazy thinking. Now, moving along, we're done with the extra credit part now. There's 4 differences between you, the embryo, and you, the adult. And as Stephen Schwartz points out, none of those 4 differences are good reasons for saying we could kill you then, but not now. There's a difference of size, a difference of level of development, a difference of environment, meaning where we're located, and a difference of degree of dependency. Think of the acronym SLED, snow. You don't get snow up here in Buffalo, do you? In June? Yeah, I've been in this area in May and seen storms, so I get the idea. Think of size, level of development, environment, degree of dependency. Think SLED. And you'll remember these 4 differences. None of them are good reasons for saying we could kill you as an embryo, but not now. Size, there's your S. Were you smaller as an embryo than you are as an adult? Of course. You know what your answer should be to that? One word. So? So? How does body size determine value? Men are generally larger than women. Do men deserve more rights than women simply because they're larger? If you're shaking your head yes, we now know why you will never get married. Shaquille O'Neal, the 7'2" basketball star, former basketball star, with my beloved LA Lakers, who was a hero until he committed treason and spent a year with the Boston Celtics, is a foot taller than everybody in this room. Is he more human and valuable because of it? Body size doesn't determine value. What about your level of development? You were less developed as an embryo than you are today. What should your answer be to that? So? How does bodily development determine value? Our critics need to answer that question. It's not enough to just assert that you're not developed enough as an embryo. Why does that matter? They've got to answer that question. You know what pro-lifers do? This is the sad thing. We buy the premise of their argument. Why? The embryo has brainwaves by week 6 and can feel pain by week 9. Both of those statements are false. But beyond that, what did you just do when you answered that way? You bought the premise of the critic, that somehow brain development gives us our value. No. Why does brain development matter in the first place? You've got to argue for that. Level of development. 2-year-old girls are less developed than 21-year-old young women. 2-year-old girls do not even have a developed reproductive system yet. Are they less human and valuable than the 21-year-old who does? I speak to students all the time. We go into Catholic and Protestant high schools, as I mentioned earlier, and I will always tell students at these assemblies, whether there's 200 of them in the bleachers or 1,400 of them in the bleachers, doesn't matter. I'll always say to them, you are less developed than your parents. You're less developed than your parents physically, and you're less developed than your parents intellectually, which comes as a complete shock to most of them. But you don't reach your intellectual peak until your mid-40s. Does it follow your parents have a greater right to life than you simply because they're more developed? By the way, this line of reasoning is precisely why Abraham Lincoln was able to destroy his opponents when he would debate them on slavery. Lincoln's opponents would say this: that black man is different from us. He doesn't look like us, and he's not intellectually our match. What was Lincoln's reply? So, here's what Lincoln said, word for word almost. Quote, "You say man A is white, man B is dark. Oh, it is skin color then? The fair-skinned man having the right to enslave the dark-skinned man? Take care. By that rule, you're a slave to the first person you meet with skin fairer than your own. You say it is not skin color, it's a matter of intellect. The white man you wrongly allege has superior intellect to the dark man. Take care again. By that argument, you're a slave to the first person you meet with an intellect superior to yours. You say it is not skin color, it is not intelligence, it's a matter of interest. The white man having it in his interest to enslave the dark-skinned man. Take care yet again. By that rule, you're a slave to the first person who can make it his interest to enslave you." End quote. What did Lincoln just do? It's brilliant. He showed that with the force of principled reasoning, the same arguments used to disqualify the dark man as human disqualified who? Whites. Peter Singer, who I quoted a moment ago, he actually would agree with huge portions of our seminar today. Peter Singer looks Planned Parenthood in the eye and says, you people are intellectually dishonest. You draw this imaginary line at birth as if something significant happens at birth. Nothing significant happens at birth. If you compare fetus to newborn, there's no essential difference between them that would justify saving one and not the other. So he would look at the newborn and say, it's not self-aware, fetus is not self-aware, you can kill both. We would say, neither is self-aware, so what? But notice our premises are the same. He gets that part right. In other words, large portions of the American public and Canadian public have bought the notion that somehow bodily development is what gives us our value, and they never argue for it. It's just asserted. Size, level of development. What about environment, where you're located? You were in the womb, now you're outside. How does where you are determine what you are? If you drove at least 7 miles to get here today, can I see your hands? The vast majority of you. If you drove at least 27 miles to get here today, may I see your hands? For our Canadian friends, 35 kilometers. We just identified all the Canadians. How many of you drove at least 57 miles to get here today? Oh, man. 77 miles? 1,070, I win. Now, with a little help from Delta. If a journey of 57 miles does not change you from one kind of thing to another, how does a journey of 7 inches down the birth canal suddenly transform you from non-human, non-valuable thing we can intentionally kill to valuable human being we cannot? And my answer is, if you weren't already human and valuable, you ain't getting there by changing your address. That's my best attempt at a Southern accent now that I live in Atlanta. I don't have that Southern accent yet, but I want y'all to know I'm fixing to get it. Ow. How about degree of dependency? Size, level of development, environment, and degree of dependency. Sure, you depended on your mother for survival. Your answer should be, so? As I said, I live in Georgia. I live in a town called Noonan, Georgia. You've never heard of it. Noonan is about 20 minutes southwest of the Atlanta airport. And you haven't heard of Noonan, but you've probably seen it. It's a huge movie area now. In fact, the wildly popular television series The Walking Dead is filmed in my area. For those of you who have not seen The Walking Dead, let me just issue a little caveat here. If you have not seen it, it is a zombie series. Do not go home tonight and say, you know, the speaker today said we should do family viewing on Netflix with The Walking Dead. No. I like the show. I've watched the show. I'm a fan of the show. The worldview themes in it are amazing, but it's incredibly gruesome. It's a zombie series, so be aware of that. Let me tell you the plot line of it and then use it to illustrate degree of dependency being irrelevant. The hero of The Walking Dead, for any of you that don't know, up until this last season really, was if you're following the series, I may have just given something away. But anyway, the hero up till recently was a sheriff by the name of Rick Grimes. Rick Grimes is a law enforcement officer, and in season 1, episode 1, he's in a gunfight with crooks before the zombie apocalypse breaks out. He's with his partner Shane. They're shooting it out with bad guys, and Rick gets hit. And he goes into the hospital, and he's in a coma for a month. And while he's in that coma for a month, the zombie apocalypse breaks out. And he's left for dead in the hospital. No one stays with him. And for a month, he's just there. And somehow, when the zombies come through the hospital, the walkers, they miss him. And he wakes up a month later, and he's trying to figure out what happened to the world I once knew. What happened to my wife? What happened to my son, Carl? And I just basically told you what season 1 of The Walking Dead is, so you don't have to watch it. Now, let's change the script. Suppose one doctor stays behind to care for Rick. Rick depends totally on that doctor for survival. Can that doctor slit Rick's throat because Rick depends totally on him for survival? Size, level of development, environment, meaning where you're located, degree of dependency, think SLED. Those 4 differences are not good reasons for saying we could kill you then as an embryo, but we can kill you, or we can't kill you then, and I should back up. We could kill you then, but not now as an adult, because the differences between you, the embryo, and you, the adult, are not morally relevant. Yes, there's differences, just like there's differences between the black man and the white man, but they're not morally relevant differences. That's the question. Not are there differences, but are those differences morally relevant such that we can kill one group but not the other? That's the issue. Now, let's wrap up what we've said so far before we look at some common objections. I want you to pretend it is Thanksgiving this year coming up. Jump ahead in the future 6 months. How many of you have family members that come to your holiday table at Christmas or Thanksgiving? They're not Christian. They probably don't share your political views. They're definitely different than you, but they're family and they're there at your table. Do you have people like that, like I do? Yeah, I think we all do. I want you to pretend your Aunt Betty is visiting from Boston. And Aunt Betty does not share your Christian worldview. She does not share your pro-life worldview. In fact, she thinks you're crazy. And she's trying her best to hold back her scorn for what you believe. And finally, she just can't take it anymore. And between bites of turkey and stuffing, she looks right at you and says, "Now, why are you pro-life?" Here is what you're going to say to her. And I'm going to do it in a minute or less. This is exactly what you're going to say to Aunt Betty. I need a timer. Where's the guy I picked on? That's you, right? Would you time me in the next, do you have the ability to look at your watch or phone? Or? Okay. When I say go, you can start timing me. Here's your answer in a minute or less. Ready? Go. Aunt Betty, I'm pro-life because it's wrong to intentionally kill innocent human beings. And the science of embryology says that from the earliest stages of development, from the one-cell stage, you were a distinct, living, and whole human being. You weren't part of another human being like these skin cells on the back of my hand. You were already a whole living member of the human family, even though you had yet to grow and mature. And you know what else, Aunt Betty? There's no essential difference between you, the embryo, and you, the adult, that would justify killing you back then. Differences of size, level of development, environment, and degree of dependency are not good reasons for saying we could kill you then, but not now. How'd I do? 22 seconds. How much? 22? That cannot be. Are you serious? 45. We've got... You know, I walk into a seminar in Western New York, I get introduced as Neil, and then 2 guys start fighting. I thought the fighting part was Eastern New York. You know, those people, they go no matter what you do, right? I'm going to guess you're a little closer to the truth. All right. I'm somewhere in there. Now, question. How many Bible verses did I cite? But did I communicate biblical truth? Yes, I did. And now, Aunt Betty has a pebble in her shoe. Do not think that means she's going to drop to her knees and say, I am so glad that your God put you in my life to straighten out my twisted thinking. We don't even do that in marriage, let alone with Aunt Betty. I mean, you married couples, when there's a spat in the house, is it the kind of thing where you say, you know, the Lord was good to me to put you in my life to fix me? Is that how it works, men and women? No, I'll tell you how it works. There's 2 or 3 days of passive-aggressive silence, and then you kind of work it out, right? We can be honest here today. That's the joy of being justified by God's grace. We don't have to worry about this stuff. It's been covered. It's who we are, all right? Now, where was I? Aunt Betty. Aunt Betty. We didn't cite any Bible verses, but you put that pebble in her shoe and gave her something to think about. Now, she has to answer your argument. Changing the subject isn't going to work because you'll always be able to say, you know, Aunt Betty, that's an interesting point, but I'm curious, how does it refute that little soundbite I just gave you? How does it refute my syllogism? She now has to deal with your argument, and you stayed anchored on the main thing. If you forget a lot of what I say today, you won't, but if you did, here's one thing you should remember. Keep the main thing the main thing. That's why pro-life messaging is a mess today. We're not keeping the main thing the main thing. We got to stay focused like a laser beam on the essential pro-life argument we're making. It's wrong to intentionally kill innocent human beings. Abortion does that, therefore it's wrong. So what we're going to do now for the remaining time in this session, we're going to look at the 5 bad ways people respond to the pro-life argument we just unpacked up till this point. And here's some very good news. You do not have to memorize every objection that someone could throw at you. For the most part, every objection you'll hear will fit into one of these 5 bad ways people argue about abortion. And you'll be able to slot their objection into one of these 5 bad categories and remember how you ought to deal with it. So the first bad way that people argue is they assume rather than argue. And we've talked about this already. What's the primary assumption at the street level people bring to the abortion debate? What is it? The unborn are not human. Exactly. And all of their arguments, the argument from choice, trusting women, not imposing your morality, not imposing your religion, all those arguments would never be used if we were talking about killing adults, 4-year-olds. They are only used when we're talking about fetuses, right? So they're assuming the unborn aren't human. Now, I wanted to revisit this point because one of the most popular arguments out there assumes the unborn aren't human, but you may not recognize it right off the top. But it does. And it's this argument that goes like this. Oh, you're a Christian? You're pro-life? You care about life? Well, what about the lives of all the women that are going to die having been butchered in the back alleys of America if we make abortion illegal? They're going to die from rusty coat hanger abortions. You really want that to happen? I mean, every time that former Senator Barbara Boxer would open her mouth and talk about abortion, that's what she'd say. 5,000 to 10,000 women a year died from illegal abortion, so the argument goes, prior to Roe v. Wade. Do we really want that to happen again? Now, I want to give you a little tactical advice here. If you're ever talking to someone and they bring up illegal abortion, what typically happens is the pro-lifer jumps immediately into statistics mode. Why, it's not true that 5,000 to 10,000 women a year died from illegal abortion. In fact, the Center for Disease Control says that the year prior to Roe v. Wade, only 39 women died from illegal abortion. So this is all false. Now, there is truth to what I just said, but it's absolutely the wrong thing to say as the first thing out of your mouth. Somebody just told you women were dying. What should be your immediate response? Empathy. You know what? You're making a very important point here. It is indeed a tragedy when any woman dies from an abortion. We agree. Show that empathy. You're going to do the same thing when the issue of rape comes up, which we'll talk about in a moment. But the first thing is to connect with a person and show some empathy. You know, you're right. It's a tragedy when a woman dies from an illegal abortion. That's a tragedy. Then your next thing is not to jump to statistics, but to point out gently the assumption behind the objection. What is being assumed about the unborn when someone argues we need to have legal abortion to prevent women from dying from illegal abortions? What's being assumed about the unborn? That they're not human. Because otherwise what you're saying is this: because some people will die attempting to intentionally kill other innocent people, we should make it safe and legal for them to do it. But why should the law be faulted for making it more risky for one human to intentionally kill another completely innocent one? Why should the law be faulted for making it tough to do that? That's the issue here. Point out gently that the person is assuming the unborn aren't human. Then do your statistics. So what's our first 2 points? Do we jump to statistics right away? No. What do we start with? Empathy. What's the next thing we do? Point out the assumption that's lurking behind the objection, namely that the unborn aren't human. So now you're ready to talk facts. So here are the facts. Did 5,000 to 10,000 women a year die from illegal abortion in the decades prior to Roe versus Wade? And the answer is absolutely not. And I'm not going to cite pro-life sources to back up that claim. I'm going to cite pro-abortion sources. In fact, when you talk to people, citing pro-life sources is the weakest form of supporting your argument. You're better off to do what we call in debate class citing hostile sources, sources that are not with your point of view. So let's cite hostile sources to back up my claim that women did not die on the order of 5,000 to 10,000 a year. Did some women die? Yes. Is the Center for Disease Control figure of 39 women dying in the year prior to Roe v. Wade underreported? Yeah, it is. Yeah, it is. So pro-lifers who, bank everything on that number, look, that number clearly is underreported. Certainly more women died than 39, but 5,000 to 10,000 a year, no. So let's go through my sources. Source number 1, Dr. Christopher Keats, former statistician for Planned Parenthood, called the claim of 5,000 to 10,000 deaths a year from illegal abortion, quote, unmitigated nonsense. Source number 2, Dr. Mary Calderon, former medical director for Planned Parenthood, in a journal article in the American Journal of Public Health in 1960, argued that the claim that thousands of women were dying from illegal abortion was bunk, and here's why. She said the death rate from illegal abortion had plummeted so low that it wasn't even worth remarking about. What was her reason for saying that? She gave 2. Number 1, the widespread introduction of penicillin in the late 1940s made all surgical procedures safer. People weren't dying from post-op infections the way they used to. Second reason that the death rate was low: illegal abortions were not being performed by a guy named Arrigo with a rusty coat hanger in the back alleys of America. They were being performed by doctors in good standing in their communities who simply skirted the law. That's why the death rate was so low. Hostile source number 3, Dr. Daniel Callahan, in his book Abortion, Law, Morality, and Choice. He is a key figure at the Hastings Institute. This is not a pro-life guy. He says the claim of 5,000 to 10,000 deaths a year is statistically nonsensical because if you look at the total causes of death annually in the U.S. for all women of childbearing age, you barely add up to 40,000 a year from all causes. To claim that so high a number came from one source is completely insane. Fourth hostile source that eventually became a pro-life source but wasn't when he admitted this, Bernard Nathanson, in his book Aborting America, he is an abortionist who personally, he says, resided over the deaths of 60,000 human beings through abortion. Dr. Bernard Nathanson said that he and his companion, Dr. Lawrence Lader, when they founded NARAL, the National Abortion Rights Action League, sold the figure of 5,000 to 10,000 deaths a year to a sympathetic media, and they made it up out of thin air. They just made it up, and the media bought it. So that's where those numbers come from. And it's helpful to know that, and in my book, The Case for Life, we give you some good reasons to, or good evidence. All those sources I just gave you are there as well. The second bad way people argue is they not only assume rather than argue, they attack rather than argue. I'm from California, and we moved to Atlanta in 2004. But before, in the years before we moved, in the 7 years before we moved to Atlanta, we had a celebrity who was elected governor. I think many of you may remember that Arnold Schwarzenegger was the governor of California. And I'm going to tell you how he got elected. There was a specific moment that sealed his victory. He's debating Arianna Huffington on national television. Do you know who Arianna Huffington is? She's the liberal, lefty commentator. She speaks with a thick European accent. And she really does, I think, want you to know that she's really smart. And she wants you to understand that. And so she's debating Arnold on national TV. She's running for governor. He's running for governor. And she looks at him and says, Mr. Schwarzenegger, you have no right to be governor of California because you want to give tax loopholes to rich corporations so they don't have to pay their fair share. And you want to give them a way out so they don't have to pay. You have no right to be governor when you want to give tax loopholes so people don't have to pay their fair share in taxes. And I'm listening to this going, she didn't just say that, did she? It had just come out in the press that she had not paid her own taxes in 7 years. And Arnold knew it. And I'm watching him. He gets this smile on his face. And he looks right at her. Arianna, the biggest loophole is your own personal taxes. That loophole's so big I could drive my Hummer through it. And that was it. We had a new governor of California. Now, that was pathetic as an illustration, but imitation. I said I wasn't going to do Arnold. I lied. But question, what did Arnold just do? Did he fight fair in that moment? No, he didn't. He cheated. He changed the subject, didn't he? What was the topic? His tax policies. What did he change it to? Her behavior. Now, it was funny. It made for great TV. But he attacked the person rather than the argument. How does his tax policy become good simply because she is bad? You see the problem? This is called the ad hominem fallacy. You attack the person rather than the argument. This happens all the time. You're pro-life? Really? How many unwanted kids have you adopted? None? Why, there goes your whole case. Really? Let's go back to my syllogism. It is wrong to intentionally kill an innocent human being. Abortion does that, therefore it's wrong. Does my unwillingness to adopt a child justify an abortionist intentionally killing one? Suppose I said to you, unless you agree to adopt my 3 sons by noon tomorrow, I shall execute them. Not going to happen. They're all bigger than me, but play along. If you turn down my ultimatum, am I justified intentionally killing them? My behavior does not justify intentionally killing an innocent human being. Maybe I am a cruel conservative who doesn't give a rip about kids once they're born. I don't care what happens to them once they're out of the womb. I only care about them while they're in the womb. Could my argument against abortion still be correct? Yes. Now let's make it even more fun. Pretend I'm not a pro-life apologist. I'm actually an abortion doctor. You don't know that, but that's what I am. 6 days a week, I kill human fetuses for a living. But 1 day a week on Saturdays, I go around the country to get some supplemental money and I teach pro-life apologetics seminars. Could my arguments against abortion still be good arguments even if I didn't live up to what I was teaching? Of course. By the way, this happens not only with abortion, but Christianity. You Christians, you claim you serve a loving God, you claim your religion is true. How do you account for all the evil done in the name of religion in this world? In fact, the late Christopher Hitchens wrote a book called God is Not Great, How Religion Poisons Everything. And if you want to read a catalog of evils done in the name of religion, go for it. That book will get it done for you. He does a marvelous job pointing out the wrongs done in the name of religion. His book, though, has a more interesting intent. He's trying to show that Christianity is false. And he didn't do it. He failed. Now, you didn't know I was going to do this, but I'm going to tell you how to falsify Christianity. Did you know Christianity could be falsified? It's possible we're wrong. And I'm going to tell you how to falsify Christianity in front of the very pastor whose church I'm going to preach at tomorrow if he doesn't shut me down for this illustration. Ready? Here goes. You know how you disprove Christianity? You show that the resurrection of Jesus never happened. Now, by the way, before you get mad at me, that's not my idea. That's what the Apostle Paul said in 1 Corinthians 15. He said, if Jesus didn't rise from the dead bodily and historically and physically, we're dead in our sins, we're the world's biggest joke, and we among all men should be pitied. Does Hitchens provide any evidence against the resurrection of Jesus? None. He changes the subject and attacks individual believers. This is what we mean by attacking the person rather than the argument. Now, sometimes it's more subtle. You'll get someone who will say, oh, you're pro-life, well, then you're against all killing. Stop right there. Are we against all killing? What did our syllogism say? Did it say all killing was wrong, yes or no? What did we say? It is wrong to intentionally kill who? Innocent human beings. So right away, the critic has twisted our argument. We call this attacking a straw man. They attack a caricature of your argument. They don't attack the actual argument you're making. So we didn't say it's always wrong to kill. We said it's always wrong to intentionally kill an innocent human being. But here's the rest of their argument. Oh, you're against all killing? What about war? What about capital punishment? You're for those things, right? But you're against abortion? There goes your whole case. Stop right there. Suppose it were true that I'm inconsistent. I don't believe I am. But suppose I were inconsistent because I oppose abortion, but I'm for just wars and for capital punishment. Suppose that's true. And suppose further that may be inconsistent. How does it follow that my syllogism is false? Could my syllogism that it's wrong to intentionally kill innocent human beings, abortion does that, therefore it's wrong, still be true even if I don't live consistently with it? Yes or no? Yes. All the person has done is attack you, the person. They have not refuted your argument. Now, I don't believe I am inconsistent because let's just look at this for a moment. We are arguing it's wrong to intentionally kill an innocent human being. Our Catholic friends have done a marvelous job creating an important distinction in their moral theology that we would all do well to understand and learn to think about. And this is what our Catholic friends have done. They draw a distinction between intrinsic evils and contingent evils. War is a contingent evil. It may be wrong contingent on the factors surrounding it. or it may be right, dependent on the factors surrounding it. Abortion, however, the church says, is not a contingent wrong. It's an intrinsic evil and must always be opposed. Does everybody see the difference between that? When we argue that abortion is wrong, we are arguing it's an intrinsic evil. Now, capital punishment, war, may or may not be wrong depending on the contingencies. Therefore, war is not in the same category as abortion. Abortion is in the category of intentionally killing an innocent human being and therefore must always be opposed. War may not be in that category. A general in a just war can foresee the deaths of innocent human beings, but he does not intend them. Where with abortion, we not only foresee the death of the unborn, we what? Intend their deaths. The two categories are not the same. So that's a helpful way to think about this when people try to charge you with the inconsistency argument. The third bad way people argue, and I'm going to spend more time on this in the final session. By the way, Pastor Pat, what is the schedule for the ending time on this one? I forgot to look on it. 11:45, good, so we're on schedule. The third bad way people argue is they assert rather than argue. If I claim there's a pink elephant swinging from the exit sign right back there by those three gentlemen, those of you that are looking did the right thing. Who bears the burden of proof, you or me? I made the claim, I bear the burden of proof. We have got to become adept at recognizing when people are making assertions rather than arguments. Tell me if this is an assertion or an argument. Women have a right to choose. Argument or assertion? Assertion because I gave you no what? Socrates is a man, all men are mortal, therefore Socrates is mortal. Argument or assertion? Argument because I gave you what? Premise, conclusion. How about this? My wife is not here today. She has gone to Las Vegas to elope with Elvis, and Michael Jackson is doing the music for the ceremony. Therefore, I am a single man. Argument or assertion? How many say assertion? How many say argument? The arguments are right. What was the key word that let you know it was an argument? Therefore. Now, was it a good argument? No, it's a horrible argument, and I'll have to kill anyone who tells my wife about it, right? It was an argument, though, but the conclusion didn't follow. Now, here's the interesting thing. A lot of what you hear out there at the street level, in terms of pro-abortion rhetoric, doesn't even rise to the level of an argument. It's just an assertion. Who bears the burden of proof? Sorry, I just went through puberty. Let me have a... And I have a drinking problem. When I make an assertion, I bear the burden of proof, not you. And we need to get in the habit of not assuming that burden just because someone slaps something down in front of you. Imagine you are going to buy your first home. The realtor takes you out in her minivan with her sign on the door there, and you're thinking, this is going to be great. And she says, oh, wait till you see this property I have for you. You are going to love it. And you get out there, and she pulls up to the corner of an open field, and you look across this field, and she says, over there, there's your new home. You're straining your eyes. You're going, I don't see a home. And she says, yeah, it is. See that roof on the ground? That's your new home. You're going, excuse me, in order for a roof to be a house, what does it need supporting it? Walls. Some kind of foundational support, right? You would never buy a house with no walls. Why do we buy assertions with no supporting data? We're going to spend a whole session on that, or not a whole session, but a part of next session on that, dealing with the Columbo tactic. The fourth bad way people argue is they confuse functioning as a human with being a human. They make human value contingent on characteristics that none of us share equally, that may come and go in the course of our lifetimes, and they therefore have an insecure foundation for human rights and human equality. So you get a guy like David Boonin. David Boonin, philosopher at the University of Colorado, easily the best thinker on the other side. David Boonin is not a flamethrower. He'd rather be here today with us than hanging out with Planned Parenthood because he likes thinking. And in fact, when one of my staffers visited the University of Colorado. David Boonin invited him over for dinner and was just the most gracious host you can imagine. Boonin argues that you and I are identical to the embryos we once were. That wasn't a blob of tissue back there, that was you. You are identical to the embryo you once were. However, just because you're identical to the embryo you once were does not mean you have the same right to life then as you do now. That what gives you a right to life is not that you're human, but that you have immediately exercisable desires, and the fetus does not get that, he argues, until roughly 28, maybe 32 weeks gestation in the pregnancy, after which killing the fetus would certainly be wrong and impermissible. So let's take a look at what he's just argued. You're identical to the embryo you once were, but you have no right to life because you have no immediately exercisable desires. First question out of your mouth, or first word out of your mouth ought to be what? So, why do I have to have desires to have a right to life? He needs to argue for that. But there's a second problem. His argument proves too much. Who else doesn't have desires? Newborns. Newborns don't get desires until several months, some say up till 2 years after birth. Because in order to have desires, you have to have belief and judgment. You have to believe something is the case and make a value judgment about whether it's good or bad. Fetuses, newborns, they don't have that ability. Third problem with his argument. Human equality becomes a myth. Some of you came today, and this has been a great year for you. You've seen remarkable things happen. And as you look toward the future, your desire to move forward in what the Lord has for you is just soaring. Others of you, if we knew the pain and the heartache, the rejection, the personal, just the sense of defeat from personal failure and challenges of life, struggling to live within your humanity, if we knew that story right now about you, it would break our hearts. You're not suicidal, but as you look toward the future, desires aren't really the thing that's capitalizing on your existence at the moment. If Boonin is right that having desires is what gives us our right to life, those of you with more of them have a greater right to life than those with less. This is the horrible inequality that results from the pro-abortion worldview. It can't account for what makes us valuable in the first place. And finally, just before we go to break, they love to hide behind the hard cases. They'll bring up things like rape. You're pro-life, and you're going to force a woman who's been raped to carry this child to always be a reminder of what she went through? That's horrible. What's the first thing we should do when the topic of rape is brought up in a conversation? Empathy. Boy, you guys are good. You are so much quicker and smarter than the group we had down in Florida recently. Man, this is good. Those people spend too much time on the beach. All right. I think it's so cold up here, you people must read more or something. I don't know what it is. First thing out of your mouth, you know you're right. A woman who's been raped has suffered a terrible injustice. You're exactly right. Now, two types of people are going to bring up rape. The inquirer and the crusader, and you're going to treat them differently. The inquirer, she hears your pro-life argument, she's heard your syllogism, she's heard your science, she's heard your defense of it, and she's actually buying it. But she's just emotionally having trouble connecting with your argument and a friend she envisions that might be raped, and she says, you know, I think you're right on this pro-life thing, but I can't see forcing my friend, if she were to get raped, to carry a baby that would remind her of everything she went through. The crusader doesn't want an argument. He just wants to make you look bad, make you look cruel and insensitive. So let's talk about the crusader and the inquirer. Let's start with the inquirer. Here's what you say, first words out of your mouth. You know you're right. That woman who's been raped has suffered a terrible injustice. She deserves all of our love and concern. Given you and I agree that this woman has suffered a terrible injustice, how do you think a civil society should treat innocent human beings who remind us of a painful event? Let the question just hang there. Then ask, is it okay to intentionally kill them so we can feel better? If I have a 2-year-old in front of me and his father is a rapist, and every time the mother looks at the 2-year-old, she remembers what she went through, would it be okay to intentionally kill the 2-year-old so the mother can feel better? What's the answer going to be? No, you can't do that. And your reply? Well, why not? Well, because he's a human being. If the unborn are human, like that toddler, should we kill them because they remind us of something painful any more than we'd kill a toddler for that reason? In other words, does hardship justify homicide? The inquirer may still struggle a bit emotionally, but at least she's starting to grasp the moral logic in play. The crusader just wants to make you look bad. And you're going to play his fiddle a little differently. You're going to look right at him and say, okay, I'm going to grant for the sake of argument that we allow abortion in cases of rape. Not my position, but for the sake of argument, we'll grant it. Will you now join me in opposing all other abortions that have nothing to do with rape? What's his answer going to be? No, women have a fundamental right to an abortion. Okay, then argue for that. If you believe women have a fundamental right to an abortion, let me translate what that means. It cannot be infringed on. If a right is fundamental, you cannot infringe on it. That means she can have an abortion for any reason she wants at any point in the pregnancy. Defend that position. Don't hide behind rape victims. I'm going to call his bluff. On a flight, and then we're going to take a break. Speaking of end of the year, November, 6, 7 years ago. I'm flying from Detroit to Orlando, where I have one last event before I get 2.5 months off for the year. And as I'm boarding the plane, I notice I have an exit row seat in the back of the 757, and I've got the exit row seat where there's like 30 feet of legroom between you and the loos that are right there. And I'm thinking, the Lord loves me. And then I walk into the back section, and I notice everybody in that back section but me is decked out in carnival gear, streamers, rainbow shirts. And it's a bunch of 40 and 50-year-old married couples going on a cruise to deal with their midlife crisis. And they're all partying, they're all happy, and I'm thinking, all right, they're happy. And I sit down, and I made a critical error. I normally put my bag, when I want to take a nap, I throw it up on the overhead above me. I'm not like some of you that try to lead the entire 767 to Christ before you get out to LaGuardia. It's advantageous to be a Calvinist and let God save whoever he wants on the plane while I take a nap. Thank you very much. But I can just see what's going to happen to the Q&A. Are you a Calvinist? Yes, but I can't help it. But moving along, some of you got that. I sit down, and I had a pro-life book in my hand. I didn't put it in the bag like I normally do. And the woman next to me in the middle seat says, oh, is that a book about abortion? I'm against abortion. Abortion's terrible. I would never have one. But, I knew that word but was coming. You'll never convince me that a woman who's been raped shouldn't be allowed to have one. I'm thinking, okay, I'm into it now. I said, do you mind if I ask just a few questions? She said, no. And her husband is like, sir, I don't know you, but my wife is scared to death to fly, and she's going to talk to you the whole time. I said, how many humans are involved in a pregnancy that results from rape? 2 or 3? She looks at her husband and says, 2. No, 3. 2? 3? 2? 3. I said, you're right. You got the woman, you got the rapist, and you got her child. Yeah, 3. I said, fair enough. I said, let's talk about how we ought to treat each of them. Her husband's like, honey, this is not going to end well for you. I said, should we execute the guilty rapist? No, I'm against the death penalty. It's barbaric. I said, fair enough. I said, should we execute the mother? Are you crazy? That's what those Islamic countries do. They call them honor killings. They don't kill the rapist, they kill the mother. That's so bad. I said, I agree. I said, how about her child? Should we execute her child for what his father did? She said, I feel like you're cornering me. I said, I'm not cornering you. The argument is cornering you. And she said, well, I don't know. And I immediately backed off. By the way, lesson. When people say they don't know or they need to think about it, don't just put the dagger in them. Back off. Back off. You've already put the pebble in their shoe. And so later, we talked about other things. She brought the issue up again, and I said, can I just maybe summarize what I noticed about our conversation? She said, yeah, I want to hear what you think. I said, well, I said, I was taken that of the 3 people you said that were involved in the pregnancy resulting from rape, you don't think we should kill the rapist, you don't think we should kill the mother, but you thought it would be okay to kill the innocent child. Do you think that put that pebble there where it needed to be? I think so. And that's your job. Okay, we're going to take a break. I don't know who's up next, but we're going to come back. We're going to talk about the biggest challenge to your pro-life view and the Columbo tactic, and then end with Q&A. We're going to rock and roll in this next session. So.
Thanks, Scott. Thanks, Scott. Just a couple things. So a reminder that we have refreshments in the back. There's the prayer room also, and the materials that Scott talked about earlier are for sale. We want to invite you also to service tomorrow, starting at 10 a.m. Scott will be here as well, so you can hear more from him. The live stream from today will be available tomorrow. If you're interested in viewing that, you can go to our website, eacrossroads.com, and find out more about that. Lastly, there is another event next week, April 13th, at Samuel's Grand Manor, sponsored by Moms for America, which is a conservative moms group standing for life, liberty, and family, and it's going to be a cultural conversation on pro-life with special guest Ashley Bratcher, who was the star of the pro-life movie Unplanned. So if you're interested in that, there's some more information in the back. We will return in 15 minutes, and the worship team will come on in about 10. Thank you.